Okay, great. First of all, thanks, Rune, for welcoming me to Parsons. Thank all of you for coming here to this super nice place. This is a really nice building on a Friday afternoon. I know some of you are doing it for school credit, which I think is great. I love education, obviously from my bio, so this is great. Today, what I want to talk with you guys about is a very, very simple topic. And that topic is format. So don't worry, there's not some kind of trick here. There's no hidden meaning. Format is exactly what you think. Format is the way in which something is arranged or presented. So you can format a document by changing its font and margins. You can format a website by changing its CSS styling. You can decide to switch formats between a website and a document. So like most of our words in English, format comes from a Latin root, formatus, formare, forma, meaning to mold or to give shape to something. This talk has 3 parts. The first part is my own thoughts. The second part is a little bit about my work. And then the third part, I hope you will talk, and that I can not talk as much, but instead answer questions or hear your guys' thoughts on what I've talked about. And the thoughts I'm going to offer are about design's changing and increasingly ambivalent relationship with format. And then the work I'm going to show is a way to describe some ways that I try to approach format and thinking about format in my own work. So part 1, ambivalence. Oh, by the way, the display typeface is by one of our students at CCA. His name is Kevin Lee. It's called Dwelling, and it's like, for me, just the right amount of hard to read and kind of funky looking. So thanks, Kevin. So what does ambivalence mean? It's a really great word to know. It means to have simultaneous and contradictory feelings about something. So to like love and hate it at the same time. And designers, as I see it, have an increasingly ambivalent relationship with format. So historically, format has been quite important to designers because, well, obviously designers are interested in form. We are trained to make ideas into stuff, so it is no surprise that we care about how stuff looks and how it feels, maybe even how it smells or tastes or sounds. So to go back about 10 years in time, in 2009, Michael Rock published an essay called Fuck Content. And as a content warning, this is the first but not the only time I'm going to say fuck in this presentation. So fuck content, I said it again, sorry, is a critique of the idea that content is more important than form. Rock super hates this subservient mindset, and he mostly blames Beatrice Ward and her crystal goblet for intoxicating generations of designers with that idea. So Rock, the person on the right, is the founder of a design studio called 2x4, which is mostly based here in New York and best known for its bold branding work for the Italian luxury fashion house Prada. And Ward, the woman on the left, was a typography scholar best known for writing the iconic modernist essay, The Crystal Goblet, or Printing Should Be Invisible. In it, she compares fine typesetting to a perfect crystal clear wine glass. As she sees it, good type and minimalist stemware are both transparent showcases for their content. Everything about them is calculated to reveal rather than hide the beautiful thing they are meant to contain. Despite Rock's dismissal of Ward, I actually see the two of them as natural allies in the larger debate around form that I'm going to be talking about today. Both of them believe in the vital importance of form, casting the designer's every move as a high-stakes matter. Ward decries the, quote, 1,000 mannerisms in typography that are as impudent and arbitrary as putting port in tumblers made of red or green glass. Rock argues that the graphic forms in advertisements for everyday things like ink and cigarettes and spark plugs have the power to change the world. To me, the form versus content debate has become kind of quaint, like a half-hearted argument on the ride home from an AIGA studio tour. there is a larger existential threat to formal designers, which is to say pretty much all designers, and that threat doesn't give a fuck about form. So a lot of this has to do with the changing definition of design. I studied graphic design at Yale, as Rune said, and then my first job after school was interning on Michael Bierut's team at Pentagram. So I had a very privileged and very, very particular design education. I was trained to think of designers as creative people who make books and posters and websites and lots of other, but mostly flat stuff. And that designers make a living by making those things for clients. After I finished my internship, I moved to the Bay Area and started working at a company called SYPartners. SYPartners, which also has an office here in New York, is a strategy and design consultancy that helps leaders and teams and organizations become better versions of themselves. And at SYPartners, I learned a much more expansive definition of design. So I learned that you can design an experience. I learned that you can design a conversation. I learned that you can design a whole darn company. I learned great design wasn't reserved for designers. Writers were designers, CEOs were designers. As a designer at SYPartners, I was expected to apply my design training to inspire change within companies. And in turn, I did not expect to make much of anything that would ever see the light of day. At SYPartners, I learned that strategist could be a job and not just a personality type. I met people who went to business school yet called themselves designers, and I thought, isn't this a funny California thing, this way of thinking and talking about design? And then in late 2011, a small but notable thing happened back in old New York. So this is what 2x4's website looked like in late September of 2011. Besides noting the use of ASCII art, which I think is pretty awesome, I'd like to call your attention to the descriptive statement that's at the top of the page. It says, 2x4 is a multidisciplinary studio focusing on design for art, architecture, fashion, and cultural clients worldwide. Very clear and very straightforward. By early October, the website looked like this. So, if you go on the Wayback Machine, which is what I did to get these, literally 10 days later, the screen grab now looks like this. And more importantly, it sounds like this. 2x4 develops brand strategy and design systems for diverse clients worldwide. We identify and articulate core values and develop innovative ways to express them, drawing on both modernist traditions and the exuberance of contemporary life. I remember feeling a chill when I first read this. I couldn't believe that the mighty form gods at 2x4 felt the need to invoke horrible, business-oriented vapor phrases like brand strategy, design systems, and worst of all, core values. To me, it signaled a sea change in design practice, where it used to be that focusing on design was good enough, it was no longer. To stay relevant, it seemed that designers had to develop strategies and systems, identify and articulate values, and that expression kind of was pushed down to the end. Frankly, it seemed like format was fucked. Form and content had both been relegated to a lower spot on the food chain to make way for systems thinking and strategy. Since then, it seems like things have only gotten more polarized and confusing. For example, Jessica Helfand and Michael Bierut spend more time teaching at Yale's business school than at its art school. And my first grader is learning design thinking at his school. Meanwhile, the art book fair industrial complex continues, and you get 67 million hits when you search for hand lettering on Pinterest. So by day, designers make big money doing invisible work for giant technology companies, and by night, they pour themselves into hyper-crafted, anti-digital side projects like Riso-printed zines, silkscreen totes, and hand-lettered signs. Today, this chaos is exemplified by the AIGA, in particular the tension between its Eye on Design project and its Design Futures project. So let's take a look at Eye on Design's popular Instagram feed, featuring the best new work by the world's most exciting designers. Do you love it? Do you think it's a soft bag of millennial pink frosting squeezed through default Cinema 4D filters and puked onto a poster no one will ever see or buy in real life? Either way, it is most certainly a celebration of good old-fashioned making and a fairly convincing fuck off to content. Meanwhile, at the grown-ups table, we've been subjected to the AIGA Designer 2025 report, now known as AIGA Design Futures, so it's sort of evergreen. There is no better come down from the irrational exuberance of ion design. Its authors, design education elders like Meredith Davis and Hugh Dubberly, have seen the future and determined that it is decidedly not zines, totes, and posters. The report starts by citing scary US Bureau of Labor Statistics projections about a steep decline in traditional print design jobs. Then it warns of a market oversaturated with people like you, design students unprepared for a new digital economy. The report is not concerned with petty debates over form and content. It chalks all that up to an industrial age perspective, obsessed with improving the appearance and function of messages, products, and environments. The report doesn't use familiar terms like form making, referring instead to something called an object-driven process. This suggests a rigidity and narrowness of thinking that seems largely unaware of the boisterous joy we're seeing next door at Ion Design. Next, the report introduces the notion of the knowledge economy as compared to the industrial age economy we were talking about a moment ago, where in the knowledge economy, the things people learn in business school, like user-centered research strategies, have supplanted the things that people learn in traditional design schools, like maker-centered informed intuition. The report mocks designers for their interest in making almost perfect objects, while celebrating companies like Zipcar for making nothing. No wonder it feels like our brains are being ripped apart. Michael Rock's Crystal Goblet hangover seems downright chaste compared to the bender of format-loving uppers and strategy-loving downers we've been on ever since. Fuck that. Fuck that. Part 2. Unless I want to feel bad about myself and what I do, I try to avoid spending too much time wallowing on either side of this debate. On the one hand, the infinitely scrolling visual feast of Ion Design is kind of gross. And on the other hand, the self-hating fealty to capitalism in the Design Futures report is also kind of gross. So I like to think about format in other ways, and I'm going to offer some of those to you guys now. So today I'm going to talk about 3 ways that I try to think about format in my own work. And these are totally made up terms, like they're not real terms. It's just a handy way to have 2 words on a slide. So like, don't worry about, they're actually probably kind of meaningless. But let's just, for the sake of this talk, we're going to talk about default format, open format, and total format. So first, default format. I'm going to, helpfully, as many professors do, give you 2 contradictory pieces of advice. The first being to avoid defaults, and the second being to embrace defaults. And hopefully this will make more sense in a little bit, I promise, but just to explain what I mean by default, a default is something that is standardized, automatic, and prescribed. So, for example, when you create a new Google Doc, several defaults are activated. A page size and orientation, a font. In this case, Arial 11 is Google Docs default font, which is, wow. I mean, Google has invested a lot in fonts, so it's interesting that Arial 11 is where we start. Anyway, a font, margins, clearly the default text color, default text color is black. The default page color is white. And for most people, these default settings are basically invisible. They are part of the atmosphere of the application. For designers, these settings are opportunities. Opportunities to make a design decision, to make a choice about format. For designers, to choose to use a system font like Arial or Courier or Comic Sans or Times, as in this t-shirt series by Dynamo, has had a sort of clever reverse snobbery to it. That said, my wife, who is a lawyer, is required to use Times New Roman in the briefs she files for the courts. And she is totally confused as to why sophisticated designers who have every font in the world at their disposal continue to choose to use Times. So we talk about it, but not that much, I guess. Anyway, she's into type though, which is cool. So anyway, the defaults we see when we open a tool are embedded in its technology. And this type of default is what we could think of as a technical artifact to be embraced or undone, depending on the designer's intent. There is another type of default, which is default thinking, or to put it more simply, trend. In the same way non-designers do not question or even notice default settings in a Google Doc, designers are susceptible to unthinkingly adopting the trends and styles of the day. Like suddenly it just feels right to use IK blue, or a lot of M dashes, or slashes, or to center everything, or to take a picture of yourself holding up your poster. Clients will ask for it, and your friends will think it looks cool. But this kind of trend-driven groupthink happens in the book fairs and in the boardrooms. It deserves just as much caution and deliberation as using technical defaults. Because when defaults are used unthinkingly, they are uncreative. But when they are used deliberately, they can make your design sharper and smarter. So my personal current favorite default format is printing in black ink on 8.5 by 11-inch letter size paper. Many designers see it as a dumpy, inelegant format compared to the rational, graceful proportions of the ISO A series used in pretty much everywhere else in the world. And Michael Beirut once said he's avoided this format his entire life. But for me, its defaultness offers both practical advantages and creative opportunities. Practically speaking, it is cheap, available, and portable. So it's great, especially if you're a student and you're on a budget. Every printer can handle black ink on 8.5 by 11-inch letter size paper. Certainly my little home printer and my crappy office printer can. And I don't have to waste time or money sourcing or producing it. It fits easily in a folder, in an envelope, on a screen, on a wall. It makes super tiny PDFs. It is very basic. And its basicness is, for me, what makes for its creative opportunities. So this first project deals with 8.5 by 11 and interpretation. I work at a school, as we've said, so there are ugly flyers posted everywhere. This creates a good environment for using the flyer format in new ways. For this series, I reinterpreted Ekene Ijioma's ethnic filter project as a series of flyers promoting his upcoming visit to CCA. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this project, but it's a webcam project that is based on data from the design census from a couple years ago and about the racial breakdown of people working in design in the United States. So design is mostly white, and so white people, when they look into their webcam, get a super crisp image of themselves and the word white overlaid on it. Black people are very underrepresented in design practice in the United States, so they're like super blurred out and hard to see. So for these flyers, since black ink is a default, I think something that's sad is that dark colored paper is avoided by people who are printing using black and white printers because you can't read the goddamn ink, right? Like, why is black ink the default? I have no idea. That's so weird. Why isn't white ink the default? Because if it was, then this beautiful dark brown paper would have this beautiful white image on it and it would look terrific. Instead, it looks like shit. So I think something that students can think about is if you were to redo one of your favorite projects as a series of flyers, like what would you do? What would it look like? So this is another flyer project, in this case sort of exploring the idea of 8.5 by 11 and defamiliarization. I was asked to design a poster for a lecture series at my school, and the speakers had nothing in common with each other at all. There was no theme that could help give me ideas for what to do. So I decided to make a mini poster, also known as a flyer, for each lecture. And then we used a 100% scale photograph of the flyers as a poster and posted it back onto the hallways around school. and also printed, a couple thousand copies of it and sent it to other schools where they probably also have hallways that look like this. And I had this image of people trying to line it up with their industrial yellow bricks. So through this tactic, a familiar presence, in this case flyers on the wall, became exaggerated and strange. So I guess a question for you based on this is, how can you play with context in your work to alter its meaning in some way? This next project takes advantage of 8.5 by 11 and modularity. So a few years ago, I traveled to Korea to participate in an event called the International Design Congress, and I was asked to create an exhibition about my school for the conference. And was sent an extremely complex instruction manual. This is a selection of pages from the PDF that gave me all sorts of opportunities to rent various lighting conditions and build sort of really elaborate structures, which seemed both daunting and exciting. Unfortunately, I had no printing or shipping budget. I would be traveling to the conference by myself, and I only had 1 hour to install my show. So I couldn't take advantage of any of this. And I decided to create the show out of 8.5 by 11 inch misprints of design student work, since that would not require any budget, and there's thousands of misprints produced every day all over the school. I decided to use the simplest possible construction and display method, which was, in this case, 1-inch metal binder rings, which you can see in the image on the right. So this is what the final display looked like. It was created using a couple hundred prints and binder rings. I ended up needing some zip ties, which I was able to scavenge from the conference crew. And I think that it's a nice way to sort of deal with a lot of constraints and still feel like you're making something respectable. So I guess a question for you is, how can you simplify your design without sacrificing its impact? The final 8.5 by 11 project I want to show is about distribution. So when I came back from Korea, I wanted to share my experience with the CCA design community. So I created a simple tabletop exhibition of the books and photos I had collected on my trip. I wanted the exhibition to be extremely easy to share and distribute. So I used a copy machine to create 8.5 by 11 inch tiles that would serve as a blueprint for the show, as well as providing information about the works. I could easily disassemble the tiles, collect them in a folder, store them, and send them along to anyone who would like to host the show next. So maybe a question for you is, what are some distribution methods for your work that you haven't tried yet? So to go back to this kind of confusing early contradiction in the presentation, so what did I mean when I told you to both avoid defaults and embrace defaults? I guess I meant to try to be deliberate about which tool defaults you accept and which ones you change. Like, for example, in InDesign, I think 8-point type defaults to 9.6 leading? Is that what it does? Some really dumb leading. So something for if any of you are sophomores and are just starting, if any of your faculty ever look at your file and they see that you have 8-point type with 9.6 leading, they're going to scream at you, because that is such a dumb, weird, random leading, and they know it's the default. So just change it to 10, change it to 9, change it to 8, change it to 7. 7 is better than 9.6, I swear to God, okay? Really. I know, it's crazy. Anyway, it's real. Okay, so just be deliberate about which tool defaults you accept and which ones you change, and beware of thoughtlessly applying trendy default design moves to your work. And at the same time, take advantage of the practical advantages of default formats. For example, they're often cheap, and on the creative and critical opportunities presented by the culture's associations with various defaults. So that was default format. Now we're going to talk about open format, and an even more confusing piece of advice, which is stop worrying about format, which of course, what the hell, all she's been talking about is format. It's not fair to say stop worrying about it. But anyway, so I'm not sure if this is the same at Parsons, but at CCA, a lot of our most popular classes are named for formats. Classes like packaging design, motion design, exhibition design, identity design. It makes sense. Students want to know what they can expect to learn and make in a class. This is probably the right model for people who want to skill up. But a crucial aspect of the design process is sacrificed when the format is a foregone conclusion. So what does that mean? That means if you already know what you're going to make, you never get a chance to decide what you're going to make. And that means you miss out on like getting to make a really, really important decision about a project. So that's kind of the tricky part of classes that are all about a particular format. Every discipline has its favorite formats. Industrial designers love plastic, furniture designers love joinery, interaction designers love Post-it notes, graphic designers love printed matter, and we all run the risk of falling victim to the law of the instrument, a cognitive bias that involves over-reliance on a familiar tool. Or as Abraham Maslow put it, I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. All of which is to say, don't worry about the format until you've understood the question. Try to keep the format open. So, as Rune said, in my practice I do 3 basic things: freelance work, writing, and self-initiated projects. And they are all sort of bundled up in this larger project, which is trying to understand things about design and culture. I tend to start projects with a question, not a format, and I try to stay open to all the possible formats I could use to address that question. So for example, I'm currently in the midst of a body of research that started with a question about virtual reality and violence. Hammers again, violence, perfect. So far, the formats this research has assumed are a series of experimental VR applications exploring haptics and social interaction in VR. An exhibition of rare video game peripherals, including some of the first consumer-grade haptic, gesture, audio, and motion technology. A critical survey of visions of VR in science fiction literature and film. This is a still from Rainer Werner Fassbinder's World on a Wire, which is an incredible TV miniseries that's in the Criterion Collection now. And also a prototype for an empathy box, which is inspired by Philip K. Dick's writing. I have a short video with this one. The sound is pretty low. That man is putting a stethoscope on his heart. And then I'm turning up the speaker so you can hear his heart. And then he's encouraged to feel the box and feel the vibration of his heartbeat. He's industrial design faculty at CCA. He's really sweet. Nick Riddle. And finally, a set of speculative VR goggles inspired by Ernest Cline's writing. So I think that the open format method should feel intuitively relevant to the students in the room, but it might seem impractical or even irresponsible for actual professional practice. So I want to address that. I mean, your client might hire you to make a logo, and they're not going to be happy if you come back to them with like logo goggles, right? However, I do think that in any decent project, there is an opportunity for a designer to push the client on format. Clients often think they know what they want until you show them what they need. Like, say it's a book project that really wants to be a film project or a podcast or an exhibition. What if you put together a storyboard or a trailer, a little teaser to show your client at the end of the next meeting, just to see what they say about it. I think communication designers often choose formats they feel comfortable with, projects they know they can do. That leads to a particular type of learning, one of continuous refinement of a narrow set of skills. Deep skills, of course, are important, but truly exciting opportunities arise when designers put down their favorite tools and try new ones, or find collaborators with other deep skills that are complementary to but very different from theirs. So I would encourage you to challenge yourself to try a new tool. The last format method I'm going to talk about today is something I'm calling total format. In the speaker notes, total is in all caps. I know here both words are in all caps, but in the notes, total is capitalized. So I just want to emphasize the importance, the gravity of the word total here. And the advice here, I think, is probably the most straightforward so far, which is don't settle for swag. So what is swag? Swag is this stuff, the cheaply made, heavily branded totes and lanyards and notebooks and water bottles and pens and flashlights and stress balls and USB sticks and I don't know, like vitamins and other, in California we get like granola bars. I don't know if that happens in New York, but other stuff that you get at conferences and parties and events. And I know that clients and collaborators and family members alike will always expect me to get so excited about designing it. Like when the topic of swag comes up at a meeting, it's like time slows down and everyone in the room turns to the designer and like expects them to light up like a cell phone at a Coldplay concert, So I always, and I think this is a good thing to keep in mind, I always get a little wary if it seems like the thing I'm expected to care most about in a meeting is the thing everyone else clearly cares least about. So in a sense, Beatrice Ward's crystal goblet is just another piece of swag, right? Like, it's a much nicer version of this water bottle I got at the Oculus Developer Conference last month. Like, then as now, if the wine had been shitty, no one would care about this beautiful crystal goblet. It's just swag. So when I say total format, I mean designing everything, thinking of every aspect of an event as within your purview, not just the swag. So with total format, we designers are not just thinking about making a cute sticker to put on a beer bottle. We're thinking about which beer, and how many beers, and how to make sure they're cold, and what to give the folks who don't drink beer, and what time the beer will happen, and what snacks to serve with the beer, and what to talk about during the beer, and what comes right before and right after the beer, and why. With total format, we designers are no longer off the hook if the beer is warm and flat, but at least we get credit if it's delicious. So, in full disclosure, I did design the cute stickers that are on these beers, but I also helped design everything else that's going on in the picture. So over the summer, some colleagues and I planned a retreat where a group of 15 female identifying artists, writers, designers, architects, and musicians gathered in Point Arena, California to explore the topic of beauty. I didn't have a name for it then, but this gathering was an example of total format design. Over the 2 nights and 2 days, we staged conversations, working sessions, readings, service projects, pop-up installations, meals, field trips, workshops, and performances. And every part of the agenda was a piece of design. And there was swag, of course, and I designed it, of course. But it was always part of a larger context that I also had the opportunity to design. So those were some kind of quick thoughts about format. And now we're at this part, which is your thoughts. So I'm curious, for those of you who have, I guess, reactions or questions, it would be great to have a discussion about that.